Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Authentic Info Podcast. I'm your host, Admire Sandlechau. Now, in the past week, President ZUMA was officially released from prison. This came after there was a Constitutional Court judgment where we saw the Department of Correctional Services losing a case, and they were instructed by the court, or the highest court in South Africa, to rearrest President ZUMA so that he can continue or finish his prison term or sentence. Now, unfortunately, the former President ZUMA was not in the country, was in Russia apparently for medical reasons. But he later came back, and everyone was expecting the Department of Correctional Services to execute the duty or their duty as instructed by the courts, because they lost that case, And the Department of Correctional Services asked to read and assess and understand the judgment. And then later, we saw President ZUMA. Actually, it was a surprise. We heard after he was released that he handed himself over. I think it was in the morning, around about 6:30 or 6 a.m. And then he was readmitted. And he only served 1 hour, 30 minutes. And was, after that 1 hour, 30 minutes, released on remission. And a lot of us were surprised to and ask ourselves as to what is this remission and why did it only apply to President ZUMA. Now, you remember, or you'll know, that the Department of Correctional Services has various procedures of releasing inmates. We know of parole, we know of release when someone has finished their term. We know of the types of parole, medical parole, which President ZUMA was released based on, and all other, types of release that are provided for by the Correctional Services Act 111 of 1998. Sorry. So what therefore then happened is that they decided that the president must execute his duty, which is vested in him by the act, that he can release inmates of minor offenses or minor sentences, and he can also release anyone using remission. So there's a presidential pardon that is popularly known in South Africa and all other countries. We saw this in Zimbabwe. There was a time where, if I'm not mistaken, the former president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, released women in all prisons in Zimbabwe. So presidents do have that power to release anyone anytime based on certain, presentations or demands. You understand? So it's not the first time. Even on apartheid, the resistance that was on the ground caused the then president de Klerk to release Mandela. So it happens in prison, but the problem is that the prisons are known to enforce the sentences of the courts. Now, what causes another loophole is that when an inmate is in prison, especially in South Africa, the Department of Correctional Services is expected to provide programs to that inmate so that the inmate can be rehabilitated and be reinstated back into the community as a changed man or woman. So it means that it doesn't only enforce the sentences of the court, it can also change the sentences of the court based on the behavior of an inmate, based on the profile of the inmate, based on medical conditions or medical grounds, based on a lot of things that exist, that are provided for by the Act. And people will understand, that our law is crafted and voted for by politicians. So they think ahead. A person like President ZUMA knew that there are ways that the president of the country can follow or use in order to protect him. We know the ANC for protecting their members. This is one of the things that was raised by the DA leader, John Steenhuisen, saying that the ANC is known for protecting criminals, because now that they've tested this remission on ZUMA, it is said that there are thousands and thousands of inmates who are going to follow, who are going to be released using this remission. so as to manage or minimize the problem of overcrowding in the prisons of South Africa. You will know that the prisons of South Africa are overcrowded. People are said to be sleeping, on the floor. People are said to be infected because of this overcrowding. They get these different types of diseases and things like that. So the living conditions of prison are being addressed and needs to be addressed by these types of provisions like remission. So it was implemented and tested on ZUMA, and the president said he's still going to release thousands and thousands of inmates based on remission. Now, you will know that all prisons have these lifers who have organized themselves to challenge the system. They are always writing to the Office of the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, Ronald Lamola, so that he can consider them for parole. And now that former President Zuma has been released using a remission, obvious they are going to gang up again and find strategies so that they can fit and be considered, for release through that remission. But another thing, as I stated in some of my previous episodes, is that I was surprised to see the leadership of the ANC letting Zuma go to jail, because there were other options that were always there, provided for by even the law itself, to protect their own. And we know them for doing that. We know that cases of high-profile politicians in South Africa disappear. But it's not a surprise. We've seen this on the case of Shabir Sheikh, who in 2009, 2010 was arrested on corruption and other shenanigans. And he was later released, and he enjoyed some of these programs that are provided for by the Correctional Services Act 111 of 1998. And another thing is that high-profile politicians and high-profile business people in South Africa, they enjoy, the law, the protection of the law. Meanwhile, it happens that they happen to be the most, corrupt people in our society. But we know that the law of South Africa works for the rich, and it is more accessible, to those who have money, because high-profile legal representatives are very expensive. There was a case of Paralympian Oscar Pistorius, who hired Biriru, and it was alleged that each and every representation was costing him 60,000 rand. So you can imagine when you are poor and facing with a court case or a charge, a criminal charge, having to protect yourself legally using these high-profile politicians. It will be, high-profile legal representatives or lawyers or advocates. It will be very difficult. So rich people and high-profile politicians always find ways to protect themselves and protect their friends using the law that is there. We've had information of corrupt judges, corrupt in the payroll, corrupt presiding officers who are in the payroll of high-profile business people in South Africa and things like that. So there's a narrative that they are pushing that we cannot run away from. But this episode, we're just looking at the remission that former President Zuma enjoyed, and now he is a free man. But other organizations and political parties still want to challenge that remission or the route took by the Department of Correctional Services under the command and guidance and leadership of Tobachan. So thanks for watching this Authentic Info podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, share, comment, and like. Thank you.
This is not radio. Entrepreneurship.
Are you making money out of this? So they robbed you. Bags of money involves some
Authentic Info podcast.
Are you saying that there's no hell and there's no heaven?
You talk about your childhood.
Music, art, religious talks, all in one on Authentic Info podcast.